Escape from Freedom. Erich Fromm. Erich Fromm wrote Escape from Freedom in 1941, while World War II was raging and Nazism had just swallowed a modern, educated, cultured nation. His central question was simple but unsettling. Why do free people sometimes run away from freedom and hand themselves over to a dictator? Fromm was a psychoanalyst trained in the Freudian tradition, but he broke from Freud's idea that human nature is fixed and purely biological. Instead, Fromm argued that human character is shaped by society, economics, and history, and that freedom itself, while a great historical achievement, comes with a psychological cost that many people find unbearable. This book is his explanation of that cost and of how people try to escape it. The core idea: two kinds of freedom. Fromm splits freedom into two different things, and this distinction is the spine of the entire book. Freedom from negative freedom. This is freedom as liberation, breaking free from external authority, tradition, the church, the feudal order, or a fixed social role. Over centuries, humanity has steadily won this kind of freedom. Freedom to positive freedom. This is freedom as the active capacity to build a meaningful life through spontaneous work, love, and genuine self-expression. It requires using your independence to connect with the world, not just being cut loose from it. Fromm's warning: history has given modern people plenty of freedom from, but far less freedom to. The result is a dangerous gap. People are free of old chains, but don't know what to do with that freedom. That gap produces unbearable loneliness and anxiety. And it's this anxiety that people try to escape. How humanity got here. The process of individuation. Fromm traces this through history, especially the transition from the Middle Ages to the modern era. Medieval life. People were born into fixed roles: peasant, noble, guild member. They had almost no personal freedom or social mobility, but they also had a stable identity, a clear place in the world, and unbroken bonds to community and church. Fromm calls these primary bonds, like the bond between a child and its mother, limiting but secure. The Renaissance and the Reformation broke these bonds. Capitalism, individualism, and Protestantism. Fromm analyzes Luther and Calvin in detail, freed the individual from the church's authority and from fixed social status. People could now, in theory, determine their own fate, but this same process stripped away the security of belonging. The individual became economically responsible for themselves, thrown into competition, and spiritually alone before God, in Calvinism, or the market, in capitalism. Fromm compares this to a child's development. Growing up means gaining independence, but also losing the safety of the parents' embrace. This is the same pattern Fromm sees at both the historical and the individual level. The more individuated, separate, independent a person or society becomes, the greater the isolation, unless that independence is matched with new, positive ways of relating to the world. The central problem: freedom creates isolation and anxiety. When old bonds disappear, a person is left standing alone in an indifferent universe. Fromm calls this feeling of separateness and powerlessness a state of basic anxiety or aloneness. This is unbearable for most people. So, according to Fromm, there are really only two paths available: move forward into positive freedom, build genuine, spontaneous relationships with other people and with work, rooted in love and creativity, without giving up individuality. This is rare and difficult. Escape from freedom. Find some new way to submerge the unbearable, isolated self, even if it means giving up the very independence that was so hard-won. Most of the book is dedicated to describing path number 2, the different escape mechanisms people use. The escape mechanisms. Fromm identifies 3 main psychological strategies people use to escape the burden of freedom. A. Authoritarianism, sadomasochism. This is the drive to fuse oneself with something or someone outside the self, to gain the strength one lacks as an individual. Masochistic tendencies, submitting to obeying and even worshiping an outside power, a leader, an institution, a partner, fate, or the nation. This gives a feeling of security and relieves the person of the burden of choice and responsibility. Sadistic tendencies. The flip side, controlling, dominating, and exploiting others. This also creates a fusion, this time by making others part of oneself, and gives the sadist a feeling of unlimited power that compensates for their own inner powerlessness. Fromm stresses these are two sides of the same coin. The authoritarian character typically has both tendencies at once: submissive toward power above them, domineering toward those below them. B. Destructiveness. When a person cannot bear the anxiety of aloneness, one option is to eliminate the outside world altogether, psychologically or literally. If there is no world to be compared to, no world that can overpower you, then isolation stops being threatening. Unlike sadomasochism, destructiveness doesn't seek a relationship with the object. It seeks its removal. C. Automaton conformity. This is the most common escape route in modern democratic societies, and arguably the one Fromm considers most relevant to everyday life. Instead of fleeing to authority or destruction, the person erases their own individuality and becomes exactly like everyone else is supposed to be, adopting the personality, opinions, and desires that culture and mass media hand them. The person keeps up the appearance of being a free, autonomous individual, but underneath, their self has been replaced by a pseudo-self built entirely out of external expectations. This removes the terror of standing alone, because the person no longer feels alone. They feel identical to the crowd. Fromm saw this mechanism as especially dangerous because it's invisible. A society full of automaton-conforming people can look free and democratic on the surface while being psychologically primed for manipulation. Case study: the psychology of Nazism. Fromm applies all of this directly to Hitler's rise in Germany. His argument: the German lower middle class, after WWI, and during the hyperinflation and economic collapse of the Weimar era, experienced deep economic insecurity and a loss of the social status and structure they once had. This population was primed for an authoritarian escape. They craved submission to a powerful authority, the Führer, that could relieve them of the anxiety of freedom and responsibility, while also allowing them to feel powerful themselves through domination of inferior groups. Nazi ideology offered exactly this fusion: submit totally to the state/leader, masochism, while dominating and destroying the designated enemy. Most horrifically, the Jewish people, sadism and destructiveness. Fromm is explicit that this wasn't simple economic determinism or propaganda alone. It worked because it matched a psychological need created by the unbearable weight of freedom without the resources for positive freedom. Fromm's larger point: Nazism was not an aberration disconnected from modern life. It was an extreme, concentrated expression of tendencies present in all modern societies, including democratic ones. The danger isn't only dictatorship. It's democracy, too. This is one of the most important and often underappreciated parts of the book. Fromm is not just warning about totalitarian states. He argues that modern democracies are also full of unfree people who only think they are free because of automaton conformity. Symptoms he identifies in free societies. People believe they want things that were actually implanted in them by advertising, education, and social pressure. People conform to majority opinion while believing they arrived at it independently. Work and leisure become mechanical and alienated, rather than expressive of genuine selfhood. In other words, you don't need a dictator for people to lose their authentic freedom. Mass culture can achieve the same result more quietly. The way out. Positive freedom. Fromm doesn't end in pessimism. He argues there is a genuine alternative to escape: positive freedom, achieved through spontaneous activity. Key features of this alternative: spontaneity, acting from one's authentic self, in love and in work, rather than from compulsion, conformity, or fear. Love, in Fromm's sense, is not fusion or dependency. That would just be another escape mechanism. It's a relationship between two independent, whole individuals that affirms both people's individuality while connecting them. Work, likewise, should be a creative expression of the self, not alienated labor performed only for survival or status. Through spontaneous love and work, a person can relate to the world and other people without giving up their own individuality, resolving the very tension that drives people toward escape. Fromm also makes a political point. A healthy democratic society must be organized so that individuals have genuine, active participation in economic and political life, not just formal legal freedoms, or else the psychological pull toward escape mechanisms will persist no matter what the political system is called. Erich Fromm argues that as history freed people from old authorities, the church, the feudal order, fixed social roles, it also cut people off from the security those structures provided. This left modern people isolated and anxious. Rather than face that isolation, many people escape freedom altogether by submitting to an authoritarian power, by destroying what threatens them, or, most commonly, by conforming so completely to society that they lose their true selves without noticing. Fromm uses this framework to explain the psychological roots of Nazism and warns that the same escape mechanisms operate quietly inside modern democracies. The only real alternative, he says, is positive freedom, building a life of authentic love and creative work that connects us to others without sacrificing who we are.